you. Now, the 20s are one of my favorite decades to talk about because you finally see the United States becoming more of what we might recognize, becoming more modern. And that's why I wanted to focus today on the culture of the 1920s. Now, the 1920s are full of the push and pull between the modern and the traditional, the rural and the urban. And it's interesting. So first of all, let's talk about all of the new and exciting things that are happening in the 20s, culture-wise. Well, first of all, you've got new technologies. Things like the radio, for instance. And don't underestimate what the radio can do, because the radio lets you hear news instantly. It lets you have another voice in the house. Communication speeds up, and so does entertainment. Radio shows were not to be missed. Think cars. The cars were really new in the 1920s, at least for the majority of the public. The 20s are when it first became really affordable to own a car. And think of the doors that owning a car opens. One of the favorite things that I have ever read about a car is there was a woman on a farm who they had a car but not a bathtub. And when she was asked, "Why do you have a car and not a bathtub?" her response was, "A bathtub can't get you to town, now can it?" No, it can't. Okay? So in new technologies, huge impact on the society and on the culture. Also, the United States is urbanizing. The 1920 census is the first time that more people live in a city or an urban area than do in a rural area. First time that happened. The other thing is things like the movies. For the first time, the whole country can go and see the same movie. The movies are very exciting. You get to live your adventures through them. And you might even get your news. They would show newsreels before the movies, and you would actually get to see video and pictures of important news events that had been happening. So imagine how that opens up people's worlds. The other thing that was new and exciting, women. The quote-unquote flappers who were wearing the shorter skirts that showed the knee or were just at the knee, wearing the bobbed hair, the short hair. They were sort of rejecting the very kind of stuffy, Victorian, long dresses, long hair, big hair, little waists with the corsets. And that was an interesting revolution for women in and of itself. The other thing, culturally, music and dance. Think about things like jazz and how that made people want to get up and dance. And dances like the Charleston that, the older people were going, "That's too provocative and we can't have that." Speaking of music, think about the Harlem Renaissance, that rise to popularity in African American culture. Things like jazz, things like Langston Hughes. He wrote a lot of good books and poetry and things like that. And a little bit of the acceptance of that culture. Now, on the other hand, you have the more traditional, the more rural. And with that, you get a push for prohibition. Let's get rid of alcohol. And really an acceptance of it. I know that the amendment for prohibition came around in the late teens, but it's really in the 20s that the law for prohibition starts to get enforced. And there really is a huge debate over whether or not prohibition is a good idea, and the politicians take it and run with it. And it's one of the questions that they will always get asked. Are you for prohibition or are you not? Things like fundamentalism in religion. I think that fundamentalism starts to come up after World War I because people are dealing with what they saw and the destruction with World War I, and it just kind of sticks around. With that, you get things like the Scopes trial. John Scopes went to trial because he taught evolution in his class, in his science class, things like that. You get people like Billy Sunday, who were the radio evangelists, taking advantage of the new technology there to reach a much larger audience than they ever would have before. So, just a little glimpse into the culture of the 20s. And you do kind of have two sides of it there. On the one side, the modern, the fun, the alcohol, and the women and the dancing. And on the other side, the reaction to that, the fundamentalism in religion, nativism even, the prohibition. So something to think about. And it was certainly an interesting time culturally. I'll be excited to hear what you thought about that in the discussion boards. If you have any questions, as always, please do let me know, and happy history.